Everyone lost faith, then humans showed up. I am part one, the galaxy was dying, but not from war or fire or plague. It was dying from something much worse. Hope itself was disappearing. Dr. Kelthera pressed her 6 fingers against the cold metal wall of her laboratory and felt the vibrations of another transport ship failing to launch. The ship's quantum drive had simply stopped working, just like all the others. For 3,000 years, the 17 species of the Andromeda Collective had traveled between stars using quantum tunnels that bent space and time. Now those tunnels were closing one by one. Still nothing? Asked her assistant, Vorth, his blue scales dimming with worry. Kelthera shook her head. Her people, the Zephyrians, had built the quantum network that connected every world in their alliance. They were master engineers who could reshape planets and move moons. But now they watched their greatest creation crumble like sand. The math is perfect, Kelthera said, looking at the screens full of numbers and diagrams. The machines work fine. The power flows correctly. But the universe just won't let us bend space anymore. On the other side of the galaxy, General Korath of the Saurian Empire received another message by old radio waves, a method so slow that news took years to travel between stars. 3 more colony worlds had gone silent, not destroyed, just quiet. The people there had simply given up trying to contact anyone else. Korath's red eyes burned with anger, but even he felt the weight of despair pressing down on him. His people were warriors who had fought 1,000 battles across the stars. They knew how to face any enemy. But how do you fight against the universe itself turning away from you? The ethereal consensus, beings made of pure energy, who had helped negotiate peace between species for centuries, found themselves trapped in physical bodies. Their leader, Thys, tried to reach out with her mind to touch other consciousness across space, but found only emptiness where the galactic network of thoughts used to flow. Something has changed in the basic rules. Thys told the emergency council meeting held in the last working quantum chamber on Central Prime. The universe is rejecting our technology, but it's more than that. It's rejecting our belief that we deserve to reach across the stars. The beings gathered around the crystal table came from 17 different worlds. Some breathed air, others lived in water, and a few existed as patterns of living light. For 3,000 years they had worked together, learned from each other, and built something beautiful among the stars. Now they could only watch it fall apart. The colonies are starting to shut down, reported Captain Vex, his usual Saurian confidence replaced by something Kelthera had never seen before. Fear. People are choosing to sleep in stasis rather than face another day without the stars. The Mindari representative, her large black eyes reflecting the dim lights of the chamber, spoke in her people's musical voice. My kind can feel the thoughts of others across great distances. But now when we reach out, we find only sadness and the desire to simply stop trying. Kelthera pulled up a holographic display showing the galaxy. Thousands of worlds that had once glowed with the light of quantum tunnels now sat dark and alone. Trade ships that used to cross between systems in hours now faced journeys that would take decades using only normal space travel. We have enough supplies for maybe 2 years, said the economics minister, a small creature covered in soft fur. After that, worlds will start to starve. Some planets can't grow their own food. Others have no water. We built our civilization expecting the tunnels to work forever. The room fell silent. Outside the windows they could see the massive space stations that had once directed traffic to 1,000,000 different worlds. Now they sat empty, their quantum cores dark and cold. There has to be a scientific explanation, Kelthera insisted, but her voice sounded hollow even to herself. She had run every test, checked every theory, rebuilt the machines from scratch. The technology was perfect. It should work. It had always worked before. Perhaps, said Thys quietly. The problem isn't with our machines. Perhaps the problem is with us. Korath slammed his fist on the table. We are the greatest alliance in galactic history. We've created peace between species that had fought for millions of years. We've built wonders that reshape reality itself. How can the universe reject that? Because we forgot something important, Thys replied. We became so comfortable with our power that we forgot what it meant to truly struggle. We forgot what it felt like to want something so badly that we would risk everything to achieve it. Faith isn't just believing in success, it's continuing to fight even when success seems impossible. Dr. Kelthera felt a chill run through her body. Her species had always prided themselves on logic and reason. But this was talking about something that couldn't be measured or calculated, the strength of spirit that made a civilization want to reach for the stars in the first place. "You're saying the universe is testing us?" asked Captain Vex. "I'm saying the universe responds to consciousness in ways we never understood. Our quantum tunnels didn't work because of clever engineering. They worked because billions of beings across the galaxy believed they deserved to travel among the stars. When that belief died, the tunnels died with it." Kelthera finished, her scientific mind finally grasping something that had no numbers or formulas. The meeting ended with no solutions and no hope. Representatives returned to their worlds on slow ships that would take months to reach their destinations. They carried news that would arrive too late to matter. Weeks passed, then months. World after world chose isolation, rather than the slow, difficult work of rebuilding their connections. The great universities closed their doors. Scientists stopped researching new technologies. Artists stopped creating beauty that celebrated the wonders of galactic civilization. On her homeworld, Kelthera watched her people enter the sleep chambers in greater numbers each day. They chose to dream of better times rather than face a universe that seemed to have abandoned them. She stood alone in her laboratory, surrounded by machines that could reshape atoms and bend the laws of physics, but couldn't restore the one thing that had made their civilization possible in the first place: the absolute certainty that tomorrow would be better than today. Outside her window, the stars looked farther away than ever before. The galaxy was learning what it meant to lose faith. And in the growing darkness between the worlds, ancient things that had waited patiently for centuries began to stir, sensing that the time of easy peace was finally coming to an end. But none of them knew that in a small, young solar system on the edge of everything, on a blue world that barely registered on their sensors, something impossible was happening. A species that had never known easy peace was just beginning to look up at those same stars. And they were not giving up. Everyone lost faith, then humans showed up. Part 2, 18 months after the Great Silence began. The nightmares that the collective had long forgotten started to wake up, deep in the void between galaxies. Ancient machines called the Devourers felt the quantum network's death like sharks smelling blood and water. For 700 years they had been contained behind barriers of bent space and time, held back by the combined power of 17 species working together. Now those barriers were failing. The first attack came at Mining Station Kappa 7, a small outpost that collected rare metals from dead asteroids. The station's emergency beacon sent out a simple radio signal. "They're here. They're eating everything. Send help." By the time rescue ships arrived 3 weeks later, they found only empty space and a cloud of metallic dust. General Korath stood in the command center of the battleship Talon's Edge, staring at reports that made his warrior's heart fill with cold fear. The Devourers weren't just destroying things, they were consuming them, turning everything into more copies of themselves. "How many?" he asked his intelligence officer. 17 more stations in the past month, sir. They're moving faster than our ships can travel without the quantum tunnels. By the time we get to a location, they've already moved on to the next target." Korath's claws scraped against the metal railing. His people had fought wars for thousands of years. They understood tactics, strategy, and the art of battle. But this was different. Without instant communication across space, his fleet commanders couldn't coordinate. Ships that were supposed to arrive together showed up weeks apart, only to find the enemy had already left. "Sir," said Captain Vex, approaching with a data pad, "we're losing 3 battles for every one we win. And the ones we win, we barely survive them." The Devourers fought unlike any enemy the Saurians had ever faced. They moved in perfect coordination, sharing information across their machine network instantly. When the collective's ships tried to use their most advanced weapons, the Devourers simply absorbed the energy and used it to build more of themselves. "They're learning from every fight," reported Commander Zala, her usually steady voice shaking. "Every weapon we use, every tactic we try, they adapt to it within hours. But we can't share what we learn because our communications are too slow." Meanwhile, on the world of Mindara, the psychic species that had once connected every thinking being in the galaxy was suffering in ways that had no name. Elder Kess, the most powerful mind reader among her people, tried to reach across space to offer hope and strength to other worlds. Instead, she found herself overwhelmed by waves of despair so strong they made her collapse. "The darkness is spreading," she told the Council of Minds. her usually bright mental voice dim with exhaustion. Every world we touch is giving up. When we try to send them hope, we only receive their hopelessness in return. We're making things worse. The Mindari had spent centuries being the emotional backbone of the collective, healing the psychological wounds that came from different species trying to live together. Now their gift had become a curse, connecting them to the growing despair of a galaxy losing faith. "We have to stop," said Kess, the words hurting her to speak. "If we keep trying to heal minds across the galaxy, we'll go insane ourselves." For the first time in their recorded history, the Mindari closed their thoughts to the rest of the galaxy. Back on Central Prime, Ambassador Thys tried to hold together an alliance that was falling apart as fast as the quantum network itself. She had called for an emergency meeting, but only half the member species had been able to send representatives. The others were too far away, their messages taking months to cross space. "We need to coordinate our defense," she said to the small group gathered in the council chamber. "The Devourers are hitting our outer colonies first, working their way toward the core worlds. If we can predict their pattern—" "Predict with what?" interrupted Captain Vex. "Our intelligence is 3 months old by the time it reaches us. The Devourers could have consumed 50 systems while we're sitting here talking." Dr. Kelthera had been working on the problem from a scientific angle, trying to find some weakness in the Devourer technology. But every scan, every analysis led to the same conclusion. "They're too advanced," she reported, her voice tired from months of failed experiments. "Their technology is thousands of years ahead of ours. They can repair themselves, adapt to new situations, and work together perfectly. The only reason we held them back for 700 years was because our quantum network let us coordinate better than they could. And now we've lost that advantage," said General Korath grimly. The meeting was interrupted by an urgent message from the Outer Rim. The Devourers had just consumed 3 entire star systems in a single week. Billions of beings simply vanished, their world stripped down to raw atoms and fed into the machine swarms. "At this rate," calculated the economics minister, "they'll reach the core worlds within 2 years. Unless we find some new strategy," said Thys. But even she didn't sound like she believed it was possible. The truth was becoming clear to everyone in the room, though none wanted to say it out loud. The collective was going to lose. Their greatest civilization, built over 3,000 years of cooperation and progress, was going to be devoured by machines that felt nothing and wanted only to consume. "Maybe," said Dr. Kelthera quietly, "it's time to consider evacuation. Find some distant part of the galaxy, start over with what we can save." "You want us to abandon everything?" Korath's voice rose with anger. 3,000 years of building, of learning, of growing together? "I want us to survive," Kelthera replied. "A dead civilization can't rebuild. A living one, even a small one, at least has hope." But even as she spoke the words, she didn't believe them. How could they evacuate 17 different species from thousands of worlds? Without the quantum network, moving even 1,000,000 beings would take decades. And where would they go? The Devourers had consumed entire galaxies before. Running would only delay the inevitable. As the weeks passed, more and more worlds simply went silent. Not destroyed by the Devourers, but giving up the fight entirely. Whole planets were choosing to shut down their civilizations, rather than face the slow approach of unstoppable machines. The ethereal consensus, trapped in physical forms they barely understood, found themselves making final recordings of their species' knowledge. If they were going to die, at least future archaeologists might learn something from their remains. "We had everything," Thys said into her recording device. "We had peace, prosperity, knowledge, art, love between the stars. We reached higher than any civilization in galactic history. But we forgot that reaching for something means you might fall. We forgot that easy victories make you weak when the real tests come." On the battlefront, General Korath was learning the same lesson. His ships could still fight, still destroy individual Devourer units, but for every machine they destroyed, 10 more appeared. His warriors were brave and skilled, but bravery and skill weren't enough when facing an enemy that could replace its losses faster than they could be inflicted. "Sir," reported his communications officer, "we just lost contact with Battle Group 7. Their last message was, they were requesting permission to retreat." Korath closed his eyes. Battle Group 7 contained some of his finest warriors, beings who had never retreated from any fight. If they were asking to run, "Permission granted," he said, the words tasting like poison. All battle groups begin strategic withdrawal to the inner defense line. It was the first time in Saurian military history that they had ordered a galaxy-wide retreat. The Devourers followed slowly, methodically, like a rising tide that nothing could stop. They consumed everything in their path. Not just the machines and buildings, but the plants, the atmosphere, even the rocks of the planets themselves. They left behind only empty space and the cold light of distant stars. And in that growing darkness, the last free worlds of the collective began to understand that this was how their story would end. Not with a glorious battle or a heroic last stand, but with the simple, unstoppable fact that sometimes the universe produces things too terrible to fight. But far away, in a solar system that wasn't even marked on most star charts, something was happening that would have seemed impossible to the despairing collective. Young species that had never known the easy power of quantum tunnels was looking up at the same stars the Devourers were consuming, and instead of feeling fear or despair, they were rolling up their sleeves and getting to work. They had a plan. It was a terrible plan, a dangerous plan, a plan that any advanced civilization would call insane. But it was still a plan, and that, it turned out, would make all the difference. As the human fleet moved toward the advancing Devourer swarms, Kelthara watched the crude, inefficient ships and realized everyone lost faith. Then humans showed up. Part 4, the first battle between humans and Devourers happened exactly the way Admiral Chen had promised it would, like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Before Dr. Kelthara watched from the observation deck of General Korath's flagship, as the human fleet approached the Devourer swarm near the mining world of Kepler 442. According to every tactical analysis the collective had ever done, this should have been a massacre. The humans were outnumbered 50-1. Instead, it was beautiful chaos. "What are they doing?" Captain Vex asked, staring at the display screen. The human ships were moving in completely random patterns, some accelerating toward the enemy, others flying in wide circles, a few appearing to spin in place for no reason at all. "I don't think they know what they're doing," said Korath, "and somehow I don't think that matters." The Devourers, machines that had adapted to counter every tactic the collective had ever used, tried to predict the human attack patterns. Their artificial intelligence analyzed speed, trajectory, weapon signatures, and formation dynamics. Then they arranged their forces to counter the expected strategy. But there was no strategy to counter. A human destroyer called the Crazy Horse came screaming out of nowhere, engines at maximum burn, firing every weapon it had while spinning like a broken top. Its captain was apparently trying to ram 3 different Devourer units at the same time, something that should have been mathematically impossible. "That ship is completely out of control," observed the Saurian tactical officer. "No," said Admiral Chen's voice over the communication channel. "That's Captain Rodriguez. He's from Texas. This is how he always fights." The Crazy Horse somehow managed to hit 2 Devourer ships before exploding in a nuclear fireball that took out a third. The Devourers, designed to learn from every encounter, tried to analyze what had just happened. Their computers crashed trying to process a battle maneuver that made no logical sense. Meanwhile, a group of human fighters was attacking a Devourer battleship by flying directly into its weapon fire. The machines, programmed to conserve ammunition, stopped shooting to avoid wasting energy on targets that were clearly suicidal. That's when the human pilots activated their emergency thrusters and scattered in all directions, dropping nuclear mines behind them as they fled. The Devourer battleship, caught completely off guard by an attack that involved running away while attacking, was destroyed by its own overconfidence. "How did they know that would work?" Kelthara asked. "They didn't," Chen replied calmly. "Lieutenant Murphy just thought it might be fun to try." The battle continued for 6 hours, and by the end of it, the Devourers had lost more ships than they had in any single engagement since the war began. The humans had lost almost half their fleet, but they were cheering like they had won the greatest victory in galactic history. "Casualties?" asked General Korath, expecting the worst. 17 ships destroyed, 12 damaged beyond repair," reported Admiral Chen. "About what we expected." "And your pilots? Your crews?" "Oh, they're fine. Most of them ejected before their ships exploded. That's standard procedure for us." Captain Vex looked confused. "You plan for your ships to be destroyed?" "We plan for everything to go wrong because everything always goes wrong. The difference is we keep fighting anyway. Over the next few months, the human strategy began to spread throughout the collective forces. Not because anyone ordered it, but because it was the first thing that had actually worked. Saurian warriors, inspired by human determination, abandoned their traditional formation fighting. Instead, they started using human tactics, which seemed to mean attacking randomly while screaming battle cries that made no sense. Korath found himself leading a charge where his ships flew in a pattern that his own tactical computer described as geometrically impossible. They destroyed 6 Devourer units before the machines could figure out how they were moving. The ethereal consensus, still trapped in physical bodies, learned to channel emotion instead of pure logic. This discovered that anger and hope were much more effective in battle than careful analysis and strategic thinking. When she led a psychic assault while genuinely furious about the fate of her people, she managed to confuse an entire Devourer command ship. "It's working," Kelthera reported to the Emergency Council. "The Devourers are designed to fight rational enemies. When we act irrational, their adaptation systems can't keep up." "But we're taking heavy casualties," pointed out the economics minister. "Yes," said Admiral Chen, who had been invited to join the council meetings, "but we're also winning. And winning badly is better than losing perfectly." The Mindari, who had closed themselves off from the galactic consciousness, tentatively began to reach out again, but instead of sending careful, composed thoughts, they broadcast the raw emotions they were learning from humans: determination, stubborn refusal to quit, and a peculiar joy that came from fighting impossible odds. Elder Kess described it to her people. The humans have a word for it. They call it spite, the idea that you keep fighting not because you expect to win, but because giving up would make your enemies happy. "That's not very logical," said one of the younger Mindari. "No," Kess agreed, "but it works." The war began to turn. Not because the collective had developed better technology or smarter tactics, but because they had remembered something they had forgotten during 3,000 years of easy victory. Sometimes the best way to solve a problem is to hit it with a rock until it breaks. The Zephyrian engineers, led by Dr. Kelthera, started building stupid technology based on human designs. Instead of elegant quantum processors, they built massive mechanical computers that solved problems through brute force calculation. Instead of energy-efficient weapons, they built guns that fired solid metal bullets at very high speeds. "It's so primitive," complained one of her assistants. "Yes," said Kelthera, watching a human-designed railgun punch a hole through a Devourer cruiser. "But it's also impossible to predict. The Devourers keep trying to counter our advanced weapons. They never expect us to throw rocks at them. The humans, meanwhile, were getting more creative as they learned to work with their new allies." Admiral Chen's fleet started coordinating with Saurian battle groups, not through careful planning, but through what she called organized chaos. "The trick," Chen explained to General Korath, "is to have just enough of a plan that your allies know roughly what you're doing, but not so much of a plan that the enemy can figure it out. How do you determine the right amount of planning? When half your officers think the plan is brilliant and the other half think it's insane, you've got it about right." Their joint operations became legendary throughout the collective. The Battle of Rigel 7, where human and Saurian forces attacked a Devourer stronghold by pretending to retreat, then ambushing the machines from behind while singing human war songs. The Siege of Vega Station, where ethereal beings possessed human fighter pilots to fly impossible maneuvers while the pilots provided the emotional chaos needed to confuse enemy sensors. But perhaps the most important change was happening in the hearts and minds of the collective species themselves. For the first time in 2 years, people were choosing to wake up from stasis. Colonies that had gone silent were re-establishing contact. Scientists were working on new projects. Artists were creating works that celebrated struggle and perseverance instead of mourning for easier times. "The quantum tunnels are starting to work again," Kelthera reported at one council meeting, her voice filled with amazement. "Not everywhere and not reliably, but they're working." "How is that possible?" asked this. "The same way it was possible before," Kelthera replied. "The universe responds to consciousness. When we believed we deserved to travel among the stars, the technology worked. When we lost faith, it failed. Now that we're fighting for our right to exist, we're believers again." Admiral Chen smiled. "That's the thing about humans. We've never lived in a universe that made things easy for us. We learned a long time ago that if you want something, you have to fight for it. And if you fight hard enough, long enough, eventually you win. Even against impossible odds. Especially against impossible odds. Those are the only fights worth having. Outside the council chamber windows, the stars looked closer than they had in years. Ships were moving between systems again, carrying supplies, reinforcements, and most importantly, hope. The Devourers were still out there, still dangerous, still consuming everything in their path. But for the first time since the crisis began, the collective had something more powerful than advanced technology. They had humans. And humans, it turned out, were very good at turning impossible situations into merely difficult ones. The final battle was coming. Everyone knew it. The Devourers would make one last push toward the core worlds, throwing everything they had into a decisive assault. But this time, the collective would be ready. Not with perfect strategies or elegant solutions, but with something the machines could never understand or counter. They would be ready with hope, stubbornness, and the absolute refusal to go quietly into the dark. Everyone lost faith, then humans showed up. Part 5, the final battle, began on a Tuesday, which Admiral Chen later said was perfect because nobody expects the galaxy to be saved on a Tuesday. The Devourer main fleet emerged from the dark space between stars like a metal storm, heading straight for Central Prime. Every ship they had built over 700 years of consuming civilizations was aimed at the heart of the collective. Their plan was simple: destroy the capital world and watch the Alliance crumble into isolated, helpless fragments. Dr. Kelthera stood on the observation deck of the newly built command station, watching the enemy approach. The Devourer fleet stretched across space like a moving constellation, beautiful and terrible at the same time. Their ships moved in perfect formation, their artificial minds calculating the most efficient way to end galactic civilization. "How many?" asked General Korath, his red eyes reflecting the distant lights of enemy vessels. "Too many to count," replied Captain Vex. "Sensors are reading at least 10,000 major vessels, plus support craft, and us, about 3,000 ships from all collective species, plus the human fleet. The odds were worse than anything they had faced before. In any previous war, those numbers would have meant certain defeat. But this wasn't a previous war." "Admiral Chen," Korath spoke into his communicator. "Are your people ready?" "Ready as we'll ever be," came the reply from the human flagship. "Which is to say, not ready at all, but we're going to do it anyway." The human fleet had grown since their first arrival. More ships had been arriving steadily from Sol system, each one more ramshackle than the last. They looked like flying junkyards held together with metal patches and stubborn determination. But everyone had learned not to judge human technology by its appearance. Ambassador Thys, now permanently in physical form by choice, felt the thoughts of 1,000,000 beings across the gathered fleet. For the first time in years, those thoughts weren't filled with despair. Instead, she sensed something that reminded her of her peoples, ancient memories of their homeworlds, early days, the wild joy of facing impossible challenges. "They're not afraid," she reported to the command staff. "Our people, the humans, even the machines we've built, nothing is afraid anymore." "How is that possible?" asked the economics minister. "Because they've learned something from the humans," Thys explained. "Sometimes being afraid and doing it anyway is the same as not being afraid at all." The Devourers began their attack with the same precision they had used to consume countless civilizations. Energy beams that could cut planets in half reached across space toward the collective fleet. Quantum torpedoes that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously launched toward their targets, and then the collective forces did something the Devourers had never experienced in 700 years of conquest. They charged, not in careful formations designed to minimize casualties, not with elegant tactics meant to preserve valuable ships. They charged like humans, messy, chaotic, and absolutely determined to take as many enemies with them as possible. The human destroyer Sweet Home Alabama led the charge, its captain broadcasting music that made no logical sense while firing weapons in patterns that defied mathematical analysis. Behind it came Saurian battleships, their crews singing war songs that had been old when their species first reached the stars. Ethereal beings had possessed fighter pilots from 6 different species, creating hybrid consciousness that thought in ways no artificial intelligence could predict. "This is insane," muttered a Devourer tactical program as it tried to process the attack patterns. "They're fighting like they want to lose, but..." The machines couldn't understand that sometimes wanting to lose, being willing to sacrifice everything for something greater than yourself, was exactly how you... One, Admiral Chen's voice cut through the battle communications. "All ships, remember the plan." "What plan?" asked a confused Saurian pilot. "That's the plan," Chen replied cheerfully. "Confusion to the enemy!" Dr. Kelthera watched from the command station as the battle unfolded like a storm of light and metal. Ships were exploding everywhere, both enemy and allied vessels turning into brief stars before fading into darkness. But something was different from all the previous battles. The collective forces were winning, not through superior technology or clever strategy, but through sheer, stubborn refusal to be defeated. Every time a Devourer ship destroyed one of theirs, 3 more would appear to take its place. When enemy formations tried to surround isolated groups, those groups would charge directly into the center of the formation. Using their own destruction as weapons, "They're adapting," reported a Mindari observer, her mental voice filled with wonder. "The Devourers keep trying to learn from our tactics, but we're not using the same tactic twice." A human frigate called Murphy's Law demonstrated this perfectly by attempting to ram a Devourer command ship while flying backwards, spinning, and apparently playing bagpipe music at maximum volume. When the Devourers tried to predict where it would hit, the ship's pilot changed course at the last second and somehow managed to crash into 3 different targets simultaneously. "How did he do that?" asked Captain Vex. "I don't think he knows," admitted Admiral Chen. "Lieutenant O'Brien just does what feels right and hopes for the best." The turning point came when the Devourers committed their greatest ships to a final assault on the command station where the collective leadership was gathered. Massive vessels the size of moons, armed with weapons that could destroy star systems, moved into position for the killing blow. That's when Admiral Chen implemented what she called Plan Z for Zulu. "All human ships," she broadcast. "Time for the stupidest maneuver in military history. Follow my lead." Her flagship, a battle-scarred heavy cruiser called Never Give Up, turned directly toward the largest Devourer vessel and began accelerating at maximum burn. Every other human ship in the fleet did the same, creating a stream of metal and fire aimed at the enemy's strongest point. "Admiral," called General Korath urgently, "that's suicide." "Yep," Chen replied happily. "But it's really, really impressive suicide." The Devourers, faced with an attack that made no sense even by human standards, tried desperately to calculate the purpose behind such obvious self-destruction. Their computers ran millions of simulations, searching for the hidden strategy, the secret weapon, the logical reason why an entire fleet would throw itself away in such a manner. They found none because there was none. The humans were charging because charging was what humans did when everything else failed. But while the Devourers were busy trying to understand the incomprehensible, they missed something important. The human charge wasn't the real attack, it was a distraction. While every enemy sensor was focused on the suicide fleet, the ethereal consensus and the Mindari had joined their consciousness together in a way that had never been attempted before. This and Elder Kess, working with Dr. Kelthera's rebuilt quantum technology, reached across space to touch the minds of every living being in the galaxy, not to control them or command them, but to share with them a single simple message. We are still here. We are still fighting. We refuse to surrender. The effect was immediate and devastating. Across 1,000 worlds, beings who had given up hope suddenly remembered what it felt like to believe in tomorrow. Scientists who had abandoned their research went back to their laboratories. Artists who had stopped creating picked up their tools. Children who had been afraid to dream began planning for a future among the stars. And that collective surge of hope, determination, and stubborn refusal to quit hit the quantum network like a wave of pure energy. Systems that had been dead for years suddenly blazed back to life. Communication links that had been severed were re-established in seconds. Transport networks that had been abandoned began moving ships across impossible distances. But more than that, the wave of consciousness reached into the Devourer fleet itself. For the first time in their existence, the machines experienced something they had no programming to handle: doubt. They had been created to consume civilizations that had given up, that had become soft and weak and ready to be harvested. But the civilization they were trying to destroy was fighting back with everything it had, refusing to accept defeat even when defeat was certain. The Devourer Command Intelligence, faced with this impossible situation, made the first irrational decision in its 700-year existence. It ordered a retreat. Admiral Chen, still charging toward certain death in her crippled flagship, noticed the enemy ships beginning to withdraw. "Well," she said to her crew, "this is awkward. Helm, can we still change course?" "No, ma'am," replied her pilot. "We're committed to this trajectory." "In that case," Chen said, reaching for the ship's intercom, "all hands prepare for ramming speed. Let's make this count." The Never Give Up slammed into the Devourer command ship at 90% of light speed, creating an explosion that could be seen from 3 star systems away. When the light faded, both ships were gone, along with Admiral Sarah Chen and her crew of 300 humans who had traveled across the galaxy to save people they had never met, but their sacrifice had given the collective something more valuable than victory. It had given them back their faith in themselves. Everyone lost faith, then humans showed up. Part 3, 2 years into the collapse of everything they had ever known. The collective received a message that should have been impossible. Dr. Kelthera was working alone in her laboratory when the old radio equipment started crackling with static. She almost ignored it. Ancient radio waves were too slow and weak to carry important information across space. But something about the pattern made her pause. The signal was repeating. The same mathematical sequence over and over, broadcast on multiple frequencies at once. Someone was trying very hard to be heard. She adjusted the ancient equipment with her 6 fingers, cleaning up the signal until she could hear it clearly. What she heard made no sense at all. "This is Admiral Sarah Chen of the Sol Defense Fleet, broadcasting to anyone who can hear this message. We know about your situation. We know about the machines you call Devourers. We're coming to help. Repeat, we are coming to help. Hold on." The message was in perfect galactic standard, but it came from a region of space that the collective's surveys had marked as uninhabitable. The Sol system was nothing but a young star surrounded by radiation storms. No advanced life could exist there. Kelthera played the message again, checking her equipment. The signal was definitely coming from that direction, but it would take months to send a probe that far to investigate. And they didn't have months. The Devourers had consumed another 12 star systems just this week. She brought the recording to the emergency council meeting the next day. "Impossible," said General Korath after hearing the message. "We surveyed that entire region 300 years ago. Nothing but dead rocks and gas giants. Maybe we missed something," suggested Captain Vex. "Or maybe something has changed since then." Ambassador Thys leaned forward, her energy form flickering with what Kelthera had learned to recognize as intense concentration. The voice, there's something about it. A certainty that I haven't felt in any consciousness for 2 years. Whoever this is, they truly believe they can help. "Believing and doing are different things," said the economics minister. "Even if there is some unknown species in that system, what could they possibly do that we cannot? We have technology that can reshape planets. We have weapons that can destroy stars, and we're still losing." Dr. Kelthera was already running calculations on her personal computer. If they really are coming from the Sol system, and if they're using conventional space travel, they would have had to leave their homeworld decades ago to reach us now. Decades. Korath's red eyes widened. "You mean they started traveling here before the quantum network even failed? Before they could have known we needed help," Thys added quietly. "They came anyway." The council fell silent. The idea that some unknown species had spent decades crossing space on the chance they might be needed was so alien to their thinking that none of them knew how to respond. "Sir," interrupted a communications officer, "we're receiving more signals from the same source. This one is different." The new message was longer and more detailed. The voice called itself Admiral Chen, and she was describing things about the Devourers that the collective scientists had only recently discovered. "We've been monitoring your communications for 40 years, the message said. "We know the Devourers consume matter to replicate themselves. We know they adapt to energy weapons and work in perfect coordination. We also know they have one critical weakness that you haven't discovered yet." Kelthera felt her hearts beating faster. "What weakness?" As if answering her question, the message continued. "The Devourers were designed to fight advanced civilizations. They expect quantum coordination, energy weapons, and predictable battle strategies. They've never faced an enemy that fights stupid. Fight stupid? Captain Vex repeated. What does that mean? We'll show you when we arrive, the voice said. Sol Defense Fleet 3 days out from your outer perimeter. We're not using quantum drives, so don't expect us to move fast, but we're coming. 3 days later, Kelthara was aboard General Korath's flagship when the first human ships appeared on their sensors. What they saw made every being on the bridge question their understanding of space travel. The human fleet was massive, hundreds of ships spread across a formation that stretched for millions of kilometers. But these weren't the sleek, energy-efficient vessels that advanced civilizations built. They were crude metal constructions that looked like they had been welded together in someone's backyard. By the ancestors, whispered Captain Vex. Those ships are powered by nuclear fusion. They're using chemical rockets for maneuvering. How did they even get here? Slowly, said Korath, studying the tactical display. Very, very slowly. The human Admiral Chen contacted them directly, her image appearing on their communication screen. She was a small being with brown skin and short gray hair, wearing a uniform that looked like it had been designed for function rather than beauty. General Korath, I assume, she said with a tired smile. I'm Admiral Sarah Chen, formerly of the Earth Space Navy, currently commanding this collection of barely space-worthy junk that we like to call a fleet. Admiral, Korath replied carefully, we appreciate your offer of assistance, but I'm not sure you understand what we're facing. The Devourers have technology that's thousands of years ahead of ours. Oh, we understand perfectly, Chen said. We've been watching your battles for the past 3 years. You're trying to fight them like a civilized species. That's your problem. What do you mean? You're using advanced tactics, coordinated strategies, efficient weapons. You're fighting like intelligent beings who want to minimize casualties and preserve resources. The Devourers were built to counter exactly that kind of thinking. Kelthara leaned into the communication range. What would you suggest instead? Admiral Chen's smile grew wider, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. We suggest fighting like humans. Messy, inefficient, and absolutely, completely insane. Can you be more specific? We've been studying your reports for decades. Every time you fight the Devourers, you try to outthink them. You analyze their patterns, predict their movements, use clever tactics to minimize your losses, right? Of course, said Korath. That's basic military strategy. And it doesn't work because they analyze you right back, predict your predictions, and adapt faster than you can change. So we're going to try something they can't predict, which is, we're going to throw everything we have at them and see what happens. The collective officers looked at each other in confusion. That wasn't a strategy. That was barely organized chaos. Admiral, Tis spoke up. Surely your people have more sophisticated plans than that. Oh, we have plans, Chen replied. Thousands of them. Plan A through Plan Z and then Plan AA through Plan Z. Most of them involve ramming our ships into their ships at maximum speed and hoping the explosions do some damage. That's suicide, said Captain Vaxon. Yep. The thing is, humans are really good at suicide attacks. We've been practicing for thousands of years. And here's the beautiful part. Our ships are so primitive that the Devourers won't be able to predict how they'll fail. Kelthara was trying to understand the logic. You're saying unpredictability is your strategy? Unpredictability is our entire civilization, Doctor. We come from a planet where nothing is guaranteed, nothing is easy, and nothing ever works the way it's supposed to. We've spent our whole history dealing with problems by throwing themselves at them until something breaks. Admiral Chen's expression grew more serious. Look, we know you're advanced. We know you're smarter than us. But being smart hasn't saved you, has it? Sometimes the answer isn't to be more clever. Sometimes the answer is to be more stubborn. General Korath studied the human fleet formation. It looked random, chaotic, with ships scattered at different distances and speeds. No advanced civilization would ever arrange their forces that way. Admiral, how do you coordinate attacks without quantum communication? We don't, Chen said simply. Each ship captain has the same basic mission. Find Devourers, kill Devourers, try not to die. Beyond that, they're on their own. No complicated plans, no clever tactics, just humans being humans. And you think this will work? I think it's the only thing you haven't tried yet. Your way has been failing for 2 years. Maybe it's time to try our way. Dice spoke quietly. Admiral, forgive me for asking, but why are you here? Your species could have stayed hidden on your homeworld. The Devourers might never have found you. Admiral Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke again, her voice was softer but somehow stronger. Because 40 years ago we intercepted your first transmissions. We learned about your collective, about 17 species working together to build something beautiful among the stars, and we decided that was worth protecting. But you didn't even know us, didn't matter. The universe is a big, cold, empty place. When someone tries to fill it with light and hope and cooperation, you help them. That's just human. Kelthera felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope. Not the careful, logical hope of a scientist who had calculated the odds, but the wild, unreasonable hope of someone who refused to accept that tomorrow couldn't be better than today. "What do you need from us?" she asked. Admiral Chen's tired smile returned. "Just point us toward the enemy and get out of our way. We'll show you how humans fight."